After Armored Core 5, the series was left in a very familiar spot. AC5 had a great foundation gameplay-wise, but just about everything else outside of that was flawed. And just like I said only a couple of videos ago, the Armored Core games have a long history of improving upon the base game massively in their expansions. It ended up being more than true with 4 Answer, so will it also hold true for Armored Core Verdict Day? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 15th in a series of videos where I'm playing every Armored Core game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along. And while you don't have to have seen the other videos in order to enjoy this one, you'll be missing a lot of context about my personal journey with these games if you haven't seen them, so I'll have the playlist linked in the description below for those of you that want to go check those out first. But with that out of the way, Armored Core Verdict Day is a standalone expansion for Armored Core 5 released 21 months after the base game. And let's start by talking about the largest improvement from AC5, the story. Armored Core 5 had almost nothing in the way of story, yet Verdict Day has what feels not only like a complete story, but one of the most interesting in the franchise. Verdict Day takes place roughly 100 years after Armored Core 5, and in that gap of time, pollution and radiation on the Earth got so bad that humanity had to live underground for a while, and Verdict Day takes place right around the time that humanity starts to come back to the surface once the conditions are more livable again. With humanity exploring the Earth again for the first time in nearly a century, they happen upon the Towers, a handful of large structures containing advanced technology from thousands of years prior to the events of this game. The 3 main corporations of the game, which all actually have names this time by the way, fight for control over these towers and the power of the technology within them, leading to what's called the Verdict War. During this war, you'll encounter numerous mysterious factions such as the Foundation and the Reaper Squad, and slowly uncover their motivations and how they believe the future of humanity should play out. There's a ton of twists and turns throughout this story, and I really think that it's one of my personal favorites from the franchise so far. So if you're someone that enjoys the worlds of these games and you haven't played this one before, I could highly recommend it for the story alone. And Verdict Day starts out significantly harder than Armored Core 5 did. AC5 might have gotten hard by the end, but it took a good few hours to build to that point. But here in Verdict Day, the opening mission is about on par with like the midway point of AC5 difficulty-wise, and if you're like me and not importing your saves from previous games, these early missions can be even more brutal. It definitely feels like Verdict Day is the first expansion that I've played out of the entire franchise that was balanced with the idea of you importing your save in mind. And on that note, let's talk about the economy in Verdict Day. I haven't brought up much about the economy in the last few videos, mostly because there's not much noteworthy about them other than how little the resale value of parts was in AC5. But here in Verdict Day, the economy is absolutely brutal and is easily, without a doubt in my mind, the tightest economy in the entire franchise. This is mostly because the payouts are so minimal for missions in this game. The average frame part in Gen 5 costs about 100 to 200,000 credits, and the average mission in Verdict Day will pay out about 100 to 150,000 before the expenses get factored in. And repairing your AC in Gen 5 specifically is unusually brutal. On some missions, I would complete the mission and repairs for my AC that wasn't even broken would be somewhere well above 100,000 credits. So for me, most missions I completed in this game paid out about 25 to 50k. That is, if I wasn't negative on my expenses in the first place. Meaning it would take a lot of work to earn enough for a new build while playing through this game. I even went into debt for the first time since playing Armored Core 2, and not even just a little bit of debt, like well over negative 100,000, which I think puts it into perspective pretty well. But getting into the general structure of the game, the order missions from AC5 have been removed in favor of a more traditional side mission structure. After completing every main story mission, the next one will open up, as well as a bunch of side missions that you can take advantage of if you want, but they're completely optional. But compared to the order missions, these actually take place alongside the main story rather than being a complete separate campaign of their own. So I would even recommend playing the side missions in this game for the story purposes alone. And while we're talking about things that are generally the same but slightly different, the team level system from 5 is also gone now. It has instead been replaced by your player rank, still unlocking new sets of parts as you level it up, but being tied to your progress alone rather than that of your entire team. I personally don't feel like this is very different one way or another, but I know from the comments of the last video that a lot of people didn't like being forced into a team or a clan in AC5, so this change just ends up taking that away and making your progress through the game feel much more personal and not like other teammates of yours throughout the game can end up carrying you. But continuing with the campaign structure, the main story missions here in Verdict Day are significantly shorter, being brought back down to that typical 3 to 6 minute time frame that we're pretty used to from the Armored Core franchise. Not that this is a problem though, because all the missions in this game, both main and side missions, are of a much higher quality than they were in Armored Core 5. There was clearly a ton of effort put into improving the presentation of the cutscenes and the dialogue here, as well as the levels themselves. And while there are still a lot of missions, a total of 60 between both the main and the side missions, the typical reused map problem that we're so used to in these longer Armored Core games isn't present here. Not to say that you'll never see maps reused, because you will, but it's nowhere near as common, and even when they are reused, there were never any maps that were used more than twice throughout the entire game. This is a huge improvement from games like Armored Core 5 and Another Age, and to be honest, one that I really wasn't expecting from this game, but one that's welcome nonetheless. And while there are occasionally some fun twists in these missions, like competing for pay with another pilot or defending an objective, unfortunately, almost every mission here is still just a go here and clear out the enemies mission. Like I said in the Armored Core 5 video, I enjoy the core gameplay of Gen 5 enough that this isn't a huge deal for me personally, but I can definitely see this hurting the replayability of both AC5 and Verdict Day if you're someone who really likes to sink a ton of time into these games. And unfortunately, I have to report that a more traditional AC arena did not make a return here. They use the same approach here as in 5, having side missions that are just AC fights, but there is one big improvement here. On top of the dialogue given within the mission, we actually got some written descriptions about the pilots. This gives them a lot more personality than the last game, but there's a catch. See, these bios aren't given before the fight like they traditionally are in the series, they're given after you've already killed them. And I get what they're trying to go for with this, trying to make you feel the weight of the fact that you just killed this person after the fact, but I don't feel like this approach hits as hard as telling you about them before you have to fight. Ultimately, I'm glad to see them giving that personality back to the pilots like they did in the older games, but I really do feel like just putting the bios before the fight rather than after could have been a lot better, and I don't really see why they changed this in the first place. But on the topic of ACs, let's talk about the customization in Verdict Day. I loved the AC customization in AC5, and sure enough, I feel like they've only made improvements to it here. First of which is the return of part tuning. From what I can tell, tuned parts were in Armored Core 5, but the tuning was randomized when you bought a part, and for whatever reason, this system was tied to the game's servers. So if you play the game nowadays, tuning is completely absent from it. But here, it was changed to give the players the ability to tune their parts manually when purchasing. So as far as my experience goes, and that of anyone playing these games post 2014, tuning was effectively reintroduced here in Verdict Day. It doesn't make a huge difference in your builds, but as always, it's those little tweaks that can make your AC feel even more personalized, and I'm not going to turn them down. On top of that, with the elements of the story based around rediscovering old technologies, weapon arms have made a return, leading to even greater build variety. Unfortunately, using weapon arms removes your ability to use both weapon bays as well as additional shoulder weapons like missiles, and from what I tried out, they just aren't strong enough to justify losing that much firepower. They are really cool, and the visual design and the animation of them swapping out with your actual weapons is so badass, but I barely used them in my playthrough because I just didn't feel like they were worth the loss. Something that I did use a lot here though was tank legs. I weirdly never tried them in AC5, so I gave them a shot early on here in Verdict Day and realized how well they play in Gen 5. The movement mechanics allow them to be much more mobile than in the old gen games, and something that I didn't even mention in the AC5 video is the kick mechanic in these games. By holding down the quick boost button in Gen 5, you'll do a quick boost forward and kick at the enemy, dealing massive damage if the attack connects. I never found it very useful until using the tank legs. The damage of the kick seems to be based on the weight of your AC, so due to the weight of a fully decked out tank build, you're hitting them with a ton of force when launching into them like that, and I was able to hit some ACs for up to 15 or 20,000 AP in a single blow sometimes. It's amazing because if you try to fight a tank at range in this game, you'll probably just get beaten out by their firepower, but if you get too close and leave yourself open, you could get hit for insane damage as soon as you slip up. I feel like this is by far the most viable I've ever seen tank builds be in the Armored Core franchise, and I hope that it's something that continues moving forward. But the craziest change in Verdict Day's customization is that your AC isn't the only one you'll be worried about building and tweaking throughout your playthrough. Once again, thanks to the rediscovery of advanced technology, unmanned ACs have made a return to this story, being referred to in this game as Unex. So in this game, you can hire various pre-configured rental Unex to bring alongside on missions, or you can customize your own to bring with you, including programming the AI similar to how it worked back in Formula Front. It's not something I engaged with much until near the end of the game, since you need to buy all the parts for them yourself and the economy in this game is so tight already, but it is really cool to mess around with, and I would never say that this is a bad addition to the game. Another reason I didn't use them much is because Verdict Day is a really hard game, and I know that sentence doesn't make sense on its own, so let me explain. Verdict Day for me personally was one of the hardest games in the franchise so far, and I didn't want to cheese my way through that difficulty by doubling my firepower and having half of the enemy's attention on something other than me. I only really employed Unex when I was hitting a hard wall, or just when I wanted to get past a mission quickly because I didn't enjoy it. And on the topic of difficulty, let's talk about the end of the game. Throughout the game, your player character ends up making a massive reputation for themselves as being one of the most undefeatable ACs in the field, and so near the end, a representative of the Foundation ends up making a personal challenge to you, essentially calling you out and saying that he's confident he has something that will defeat you. So you meet out in the middle of the desert, and then this happens.
It's not one I can live in. And so you abandoned mankind to destroy it? There is no place for me other than the battlefield. To live as I please and die a senseless death. That is who I am, not a mere man of flesh. War is part of my existence.
That's right. The Foundation managed to revive Unex and find a way to power it, sending his best pilot in it to kill you. And this fight is hard. Like, it's the hardest fight I've seen in the franchise. I spent over 2 hours trying to beat this thing, at first using my build from the few missions before, then changing to a tank build for better firepower, and then even building a duplicate tank build for my Unex so that we could take him on together, and I was still stuck for over an hour past this point. I was using the best cheese build that I could possibly find for him, and it still took me over an hour past that. And I know that saying this is the hardest fight in the series will cause some anger for some people, mostly because Last Raven exists, but to me, Last Raven and Verdict Day are the two hardest AC games, but for completely different reasons. Last Raven achieved its difficulty through a more endurance-based approach, throwing multiple challenges at you in one mission with no resupplies or repairs, meaning you have to maintain perfect play in what otherwise might have only been moderately difficult encounters. And I did spend about 2 hours on that one pulverizer fight in Last Raven, but that was because it was after a full mission followed by an AC fight, and then you fight the pulverizer with whatever ammo and AP you have left by the end. But here in Verdict Day, they more often take the approach of throwing you at a single encounter with full AP and ammunition, but those encounters can be so difficult that they end up being on par with some of Last Raven's most brutal missions. So the fact that these two missions took me about the same amount of time means that, to me, the next fight here is easily the hardest boss I've encountered thus far, because it didn't even have anything preceding it. I was stuck for over 2 hours on just this fight alone, whereas with the pulverizer in Last Raven, if that fight was the entire mission, it would have taken me nowhere near as long. But after over 2 hours of effort, me and my UNAC were finally able to get a good run and take this guy down. And this fight was insane. I spent hours in Gen 4 flying around in my next, blasting standard ACs that never stood a chance. But now that dynamic had been flipped on me, and I realized just how impossible those odds actually were. It was not only the highlight of my Verdict Day playthrough, but even one of the highlights of the entire series so far. Just the sheer pants-shitting terror of this guy flying in and setting up his primal armor to go off was incredible. And before I wrap things up, let's talk about something I forgot to mention in the AC5 video. When you complete the main stories of both Armored Core 5 and Verdict Day, you unlock the ultimate weapons. These are gigantic weapons that were used against you by various bosses throughout the game that you can now equip and use during missions or online play. They aren't very practical, and I never really used them since you have to complete the game to unlock them, meaning they're only really there if you keep playing past finishing the game, but they're really cool and deserve a mention at the very least. But overall, I knew going in that there was a ton of potential in Gen 5's gameplay, and Verdict Day has done nothing but proven me right. The mission structure has been made a lot smoother, the customization only got better, the story is wildly entertaining, and it has an amazingly satisfying difficulty that can even be made easier by using Unex if you feel like it's too much or you just aren't in the mood. It really is just Armored Core 5, but better in every way and not downgraded in any way. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Armored Core Verdict Day a 7.8. But what do you guys think? Those of you that have played the game, those of you learning about it for the first time through this video, let me know in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, a comment, a sub, anything to let me and the algorithm know that you did enjoy. It helps me out a lot, so I'd really appreciate it. And heads up, for the last time in the series, I'll be linking the poll for the next review series in the comments below. So if you want to have a say in what we talk about on the channel next, make sure to vote now or forever hold your peace. And remember, you can pick as many options from the list as you want, so feel free to check every box that you would be interested in, rather than trying to sit there and pick which one would be your favorite. And hey, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't seen them already, then you definitely enjoy the rest of my Armored Core videos, so I'll have those linked right here on screen.